Hey there guys, today we're taking a look at Gears 4 running on the AMD Ryzen 5 5500U. Now you're looking at the in-game benchmark right now running with 720p at the lowest in-game graphics settings. And the reason that we're at 720p is because I can't adjust that. For some reason the game just will not let me go past 720p. Not really sure why. But what was interesting is that running through the benchmark, the performance that we're getting is pretty abysmal. But pay attention to the CPU usage and the GPU usage. The GPU is hardly being touched, really. A lot of the times it's actually downclocking pretty low, and you'll see that the CPU is getting very close to or even reaching its maximum clock speed of 4 gigahertz. So what's happening here is that we're actually extremely CPU bound. The CPU is essentially being the bottleneck here, and that's really surprising to see. Now we can raise the TDP up to 25 watts to see if that would alleviate this bottleneck that we have here, but to absolutely no surprise, it actually does not make any difference. This is the game running at the 25 watt TDP, and you'll see that we're pretty much hardly using any more wattage than the stock 15 watt TDP. The reason being is that, again, we are CPU bound. Now you'll look at the fact that we have around 20 to 25% usage on the CPU and think, how are we CPU bound here? The thing is, the game is pretty much extremely limited in the amount of cores that it can use. We're just using 1 to 2 cores for practically everything. So those 2 cores at most are reaching the maximum clock speed, and that's it. That's the bottleneck that we have there, which is why the GPU is really not doing a whole lot, and it can actually downclock itself. And since we don't really need that much power to fully load 2 of the CPU cores, then of course we're not getting anywhere near the 25 watt TDP for most of the test here. And to really drive that point home, here we have the system set to a TDP of 30 watts, and again, we're seeing no meaningful difference in terms of the wattage that we're using. We are just completely limited by the, at this point, just maximum clock speed of the CPU and the IPC of it. And it's a really interesting scenario because the game itself, I did not actually expect to be this CPU bound, and the CPU being this much of a limiting factor in this. Now what this means is that we could pretty much turn up the graphics settings if we wanted to, but that won't alleviate the CPU problems. We're pretty much just going to be at the same level of performance that we're at right now, just with better visual quality. Now of course I can't raise the resolution because, again, the game won't let me, but in general this is a very interesting situation, and I'm very curious to see how the 5600H would actually perform here, since we will have a higher IPC. So I'm very much going to take a look at that. But actually jumping into the game itself, here we are still on the 5500U, and it's interesting because there will be moments where we actually get some pretty decent performance, but then things fall apart, especially in the 1% lows, and it's just really surprising to see how CPU bound this is. In most games, we're never really hitting the full 4 gigahertz clock speed of the CPU here. It's a shame really that these APUs don't actually allow manual overclocking, because if we could bump this up to around 4.5 gigahertz, that might actually be enough to alleviate the problems that we have and maybe bump us up to at least a 30 FPS average here. But it's definitely an interesting scenario, and it's pretty much making these old Zen 2 cores kind of just show their limitation here, because when it comes to these APUs, we're not just talking about the IPC of Zen 2 or anything like that. APUs essentially have reduced cache, and the reason that they have that is because they have to have room for all of the GPU logic. So sacrificing some of that cache is going to for sure affect the performance, especially in games. And that's one of the benefits of going with Zen 3 or even Zen 4, where you get far more cache available to you, as well as higher clock speeds and just inherently a higher IPC. Now for Zen 3, a lot of the performance uplift that actually ended up coming with the new architecture was mostly just in the increase of cache itself. So it's going to be interesting to see if that actually plays a role in this. But I might actually do a direct comparison between this and the 5560U, since the 5560U is Zen 3 based, but it has the same cache amount as the 5500U. So if we set both of them to 25 watts, we can pretty much do a head-to-head comparison to see what the actual performance is like in terms of potential uplift between Zen 2 and Zen 3 when we're just completely matching in terms of cache. But as it stands, this game is going to be pretty much completely unplayable on here. It's a shame, but it did actually end up being a very interesting piece to examine, just because the performance was such an anomaly, because we rarely get games that are this CPU bound. But anyways, I will catch you guys in the next one.